pretty good team.
That was pretty. It was
What
pretty
made
decent.
that team so good, you two?
Welcome back to Clark USA fans. Today we're diving into one of the most shocking and controversial stories surrounding women's basketball and one of its brightest stars. Over the past few weeks, a wave of rumors, speculation, and heated debates has taken over social media, sports shows, and fan communities. The reason? A stunning claim that the most electrifying player in women's basketball, Caitlin Clark, may have stepped away from USA Basketball after a tense face-to-face confrontation with head coach Carol Lawson. According to someone reportedly close to Clark, the words were blunt and emotional. "She's done. I'm not doing this anymore." Within minutes of those words circulating online, the internet exploded. Fans were stunned. Analysts were scrambling for answers. And insiders began whispering about a locker room moment that no one saw coming but that might explain everything. What actually happened behind those closed doors? Why would a superstar at the peak of her popularity consider stepping away from representing her country? And why does the story appear far more complicated and darker than the headlines suggest? Stay with us, because over the next several minutes we're breaking down every piece of the story, from the moment the roster dropped to the coaching decisions that may have triggered one of the most talked about tensions in recent basketball history. To understand how this controversy began, we need to go back to the moment USA Basketball released the Team USA roster on February 4th, 2025. Whenever a national roster is announced, fans immediately start scanning the list for certain names. And in this case, one name above all others drew attention: Caitlin Clark. When the roster was first posted online, thousands of fans opened the graphic expecting either celebration or outrage. And yes, Clark's name was on the list. Technically, that should have been the end of the story. But strangely, that was only the beginning of the chaos. Because what fans noticed wasn't just who was included, it was how Clark was presented. After everything she had accomplished in her rookie season, people expected the announcement to feel like a coronation moment, the kind of moment where the Federation highlights its newest superstar.
Thinking about a bomb, the hesitation to take the lead.
Instead, Clark's name appeared quietly in the middle of a simple list. There was no feature graphic centered on her.
No celebratory spotlight.
Not even a promotional image of her on the official Team USA cover art. For a player who had just completed arguably the most impactful rookie season in WNBA history, the lack of emphasis felt strange. Within hours, one viral comment summed up the mood across the internet. The post said Clark had broken every record she could touch, transformed a struggling franchise, and yet the announcement made her look like a backup plan. That single line spread across social media faster than the roster itself, fueling debates about respect, recognition, and whether the league's most popular player was being intentionally downplayed. The frustration from fans becomes easier to understand when you look at what Clark had accomplished in the months leading up to that announcement. During her rookie year with the Indiana Fever, Clark didn't just perform well, she rewrote expectations for what a rookie guard could do in the WNBA. She led the entire league in assists, finished near the top in scoring, and consistently produced highlight reel plays that went viral around the sports world. More importantly, she helped transform the trajectory of a struggling franchise. The Fever had managed only 13 wins the previous season. With Clark running the offense, that number jumped to 24 wins in a single year. That kind of improvement doesn't happen by accident. It requires leadership, court vision, and the kind of basketball IQ that can elevate every teammate on the floor. Analysts across the country repeatedly pointed out that Clark's playmaking forced defenses to stretch farther than ever before. Opposing teams had to guard her well beyond the three-point line, which opened passing lanes and created opportunities for the entire roster. By every statistical measure, Clark had proven she could dominate at the professional level. And that mattered, because just months earlier, critics had questioned whether she was ready for international competition. The memory of that earlier controversy still lingered in the background. When the roster for the 2024 Summer Olympics was announced, Clark's name was missing. At the time, USA Basketball offered a straightforward explanation. They said the roster had been finalized before Clark had even begun her WNBA career. Without professional experience, the selection committee claimed they couldn't guarantee how her college success would translate to the professional stage. Some fans accepted that reasoning. Others were furious. The debate dominated sports talk shows for weeks. But Clark herself didn't respond with complaints. Instead, she responded with performance. She stepped onto the court determined to prove that she belonged among the best players in the world. Game after game, she demonstrated elite shooting range, unmatched passing vision, and a competitive intensity that quickly made her the face of a new era in women's basketball. By the end of the season, the conversation had completely changed. The question was no longer whether Clark belonged on Team USA, it was whether the team could afford to leave her out again. So when the 2025 roster finally included her name, fans expected the announcement to feel like recognition of everything she had proven. Instead, the rollout felt strangely muted.
But they're not going to do that, and with Noelle Quinn, as you mentioned, no challenge.
Clark.
No dramático introduction.
No celebratory campaign, just a list of names quietly posted online. On the surface, that might not sound like a major issue, but symbolism matters in professional sports. The way organizations present their stars sends a message about hierarchy, leadership, and whose presence defines the team. For many supporters, the understated announcement felt like a signal that Clark still wasn't being fully embraced as the centerpiece of the program. And while that frustration was building online, another development was about to escalate the situation dramatically. 3 days after the roster reveal, the coaching staff for Team USA was announced. The headline name was Carol Lawson, the head coach at Duke University. On paper, Lawson's resume was respectable. She had years of coaching experience and a strong background in player development. But the timing of her appointment sparked immediate debate among analysts. During the previous college season, Duke had entered the year ranked among the top teams in the country. Yet as the season progressed, critics began pointing out problems with the team's offensive system. Ball movement slowed down. Floor spacing often looked cramped. And in high-pressure moments, scoring sometimes stalled completely. Several commentators publicly questioned whether Lawson's structured approach limited the creativity of elite offensive players. Now imagine placing that philosophy on a roster packed with some of the most explosive scorers and playmakers in women's basketball history. The gap between the talent on the floor and the system being installed above them suddenly looked enormous. Consider the names involved. Alongside Clark were players like Paige Buchers, Angel Reese, Kelsey Plum, and Chelsea Gray, athletes capable of taking over games individually. Each of them thrives in a fast, dynamic system where creativity and tempo drive the offense. Fans immediately wondered whether a slower, more controlled system would clash with the natural style of those players. Would the team emphasize freedom and playmaking, or would it prioritize strict structure and pace control? That philosophical tension quickly became a major topic of discussion among basketball insiders. And then another coaching announcement complicated things even further. One of the assistant coaches selected for the staff was Stephanie White. To be clear, White is widely respected in the basketball world. She had previously won WNBA Coach of the Year while leading the Connecticut Sun. Later, she returned to coach the Indiana Fever, guiding them to one of the most successful seasons in franchise history. On the surface, her selection seemed logical. However, the timeline of her involvement with Team USA events raised eyebrows. Over the previous year, White had appeared at multiple national training camps and development events connected to USA basketball. In April 2024, she worked as a court coach during a national training session. In October, she became head coach of the Indiana Fever, the same team Clark had just joined. By December, she was attending Team USA training camps again, now in an assistant coaching role. And by March 2025, she was officially part of the coaching staff preparing the squad for international qualifiers. For appearances within less than a year, all intersecting with the orbit of the same superstar player. In professional sports, relationships between players and coaches can shape an athlete's development. But they can also create tension when boundaries between different teams begin to blur. Clark had already spent months operating within White's system in Indiana.
Here comes Sabali.
Every practice, every film session, every strategy meeting had been guided by the same voice. For most elite athletes, the off-season and international play provide a chance to reset mentally, to experience new philosophies and different leadership styles. That variety can help players expand their skills and approach the game from fresh perspectives. Instead, Clark was facing the possibility of stepping into another environment influenced by the same coaching voice she had already been hearing all year. Some insiders believe that dynamic may have contributed to the tension that eventually surfaced. And that brings us back to the rumor that started everything, a reported locker room confrontation between Clark and head coach Carol Lawson. While details remain unclear, several insiders claim the discussion centered around offensive philosophy and player roles. Clark built her reputation on playing fast, pushing the pace, and creating spontaneous scoring opportunities. If the Team USA system emphasized slower, more controlled possessions, that difference could have sparked a heated debate. For a player known for her competitive fire, the idea of being restricted within a rigid structure might have felt frustrating. Combine that with the emotional weight of the Olympic controversy from the previous year and the pressure of representing the national team, and you have a situation where tensions could easily boil over. Whether Clark truly walked away from Team USA or whether the story has been exaggerated remains uncertain. What is clear is that the discussion around her role, the coaching structure, and the expectations placed on the program has ignited one of the biggest debates in women's basketball today. Fans are demanding transparency. Analysts are dissecting every detail. And the basketball world is waiting to see what happens next. One thing is certain. When a player as influential as Caitlin Clark finds herself at the center of controversy, the ripple effects are felt across the entire sport.
The ball in transition. Oh, that's not gonna waste.
As the story around Caitlin Clark continues to unfold, the conversation has shifted from simple rumors to a deeper examination of how systems, coaching philosophies, and player development intersect at the highest level of basketball. What happened during those weeks surrounding the Team USA preparations wasn't just about one disagreement or one uncomfortable meeting. It reflects a broader tension that often emerges when a generational talent enters structures that were built long before that talent arrived. At the highest level of professional and international sports, development rarely happens in isolation. Players grow when they are exposed to different coaching philosophies, different expectations, and different systems that challenge their instincts. That variety is often what pushes elite athletes to reach their next level. When a player spends too much time operating under the same structure, hearing the same instructions, and responding to the same strategic framework, growth can begin to stall. Not because the coach is ineffective, but because the player needs new perspectives to expand their game. That reality isn't a criticism of any single coach. It's simply how development works in elite basketball environments. For Clark, however, that variety never truly arrived. After completing her first full season with the Indiana Fever under head coach Stephanie White, she entered the national team environment only to find a familiar voice already present in the coaching structure. In many cases, athletes welcome continuity because it creates stability. But for a player whose style thrives on creativity, spontaneity, and rapid decision-making, repeating the same structure in back-to-back environments can feel limiting. Clark had just spent months learning and executing a specific offensive system with Indiana. Every possession, every practice drill, every film session had revolved around the same strategic philosophy. When she arrived at the national team environment and realized that the same coaching influence would continue shaping her role, the opportunity for a fresh start disappeared almost immediately. For many observers, that became the central issue. Not whether White was qualified or capable, but whether Clark was being given the freedom and space necessary to play the style of basketball that made her a global star. To understand that tension, it helps to examine Clark's natural style of play. She is widely recognized as one of the most dynamic pick-and-roll guards in the world. Her ability to read defensive rotations in real time allows her to manipulate space in ways that very few players can replicate. When Clark operates with the ball in her hands, she forces defenses to make impossible decisions. If defenders step too far forward to stop her deep shooting range, she drives past them. If they collapse toward the paint, she finds open teammates with precise passing angles that appear almost before the defense realizes what's happening. That improvisational rhythm is central to her identity as a player. She thrives when the game speeds up and when she is allowed to attack defenses instinctively. However, The offensive structure used during the 2025 season in Indiana leaned heavily toward organized sets, carefully controlled pacing, and veteran-driven initiation of offensive possessions. While that system created stability and reduced turnovers, it also required Clark to operate within tighter boundaries than she had experienced earlier in her career.
Teammate and laid it in. She's got 20.
Statistically, Clark's rookie year was remarkable by almost any standard. She averaged 19, 2 points, 8
For assists and 5.
7 rebounds per game, numbers that would be impressive even for a veteran guard, let alone someone adjusting to the speed and physicality of the WNBA. Analysts repeatedly highlighted how rare it was for a rookie to immediately lead the league in playmaking while also ranking among the top scorers. Yet beneath those impressive numbers, several observers noticed subtle patterns that hinted at deeper strategic decisions within the team's offense. In certain fourth-quarter situations, particularly in close games, Clark's usage rate appeared to decline. Instead of running late-game possessions through her pick-and-roll creation, the offense sometimes shifted towards structured sets initiated by other players. That approach occasionally reduced Clark's shot attempts during the moments when many fans expected her to take control of the game. One particular sequence from the Fever's playoff matchup against the Connecticut Sun became a frequent talking point among analysts and fans. During the second game of that series, Indiana found itself trailing by 4 points with just under 3 minutes remaining. Clark had already scored 22 points and was arguably the most effective offensive player on the floor. In situations like that, many teams naturally turn to their hottest player to generate scoring opportunities. Yet in that moment, the offense ran a set designed to create a different look rather than placing the ball directly in Clark's hands. The play resulted in a contested shot that missed, and the momentum shifted toward Connecticut. Indiana ultimately lost that game, and the series soon afterward. That moment didn't necessarily prove that the coaching decision was wrong. Basketball strategy often involves calculated risks, but it did illustrate a recurring theme. At times, the system seemed to operate independently of the player who posed the greatest threat to opposing defenses. Throughout that playoff series, adjustments came slowly. The Suns' defensive schemes focused heavily on limiting Clark's space beyond the arc and disrupting passing lanes. Fans watching closely noticed visible moments of frustration on Clark's face during 2 of those games, particularly when offensive possession stalled or when opportunities for quick transition attacks were replaced with slower half-court sets. Those moments were subtle, but they resonated with viewers who believed Clark's strengths were not being fully utilized. It wasn't a matter of disrespect or conflict. It was a question of philosophy. Some coaches believe discipline and structure create consistency in high-pressure situations. Others believe elite players should be given greater freedom to improvise when the game is on the line. Clark's style naturally aligns with the latter approach. The emotional weight of that debate became even heavier when considering what could happen if Clark struggled in the upcoming international competition. In sports narratives, outcomes often shape perception more strongly than context. If Clark were to perform below expectations during a qualifying tournament, if her minutes were limited, if she were asked to operate primarily off the ball, or if the offense slowed her rhythm, the storyline might quickly shift toward questioning her ability rather than questioning the system. In other words, the structure would remain intact while the player absorbed the criticism. That dynamic creates a difficult situation for any athlete, especially one whose popularity and visibility place her under constant public scrutiny. When Clark joined the national team environment led by Carol Lawson, many fans hoped she would experience a clean slate, a chance to operate in a new system guided by a new voice.
A little bit earlier, I asked Diana, what was your playing weight at UConn? She said 1.
Instead, early reports suggested that the offensive structure being introduced looked surprisingly familiar to the one she had just experienced in Indiana. The system emphasized deliberate pacing, controlled spacing, and carefully designed sets rather than the fast, improvisational style that had defined Clark's rise to stardom. According to individuals familiar with the early stages of training camp, Clark raised questions about this approach during a team meeting. Importantly, sources indicated that she did so respectfully and professionally. She didn't criticize teammates or coaches publicly. Instead, She asked direct questions about how the offense would create opportunities for guards to run pick-and-roll actions and generate movement away from the ball. Lawson reportedly responded by explaining the reasoning behind the system, emphasizing defensive balance and controlled tempo as keys to international success. Yet the exchange grew increasingly intense as the discussion continued. That moment stood out precisely because Clark has long been known for her willingness to listen and adapt. Coaches who worked with her at the collegiate level often described her as highly coachable, someone who absorbs feedback quickly and adjusts her play accordingly. For a player with that reputation to raise concerns in a group setting suggested that her frustration had been building gradually rather than erupting suddenly. Following that meeting, whispers began circulating among players and staff that Clark had privately expressed thoughts about stepping away from the program. According to some reports, the phrase, "I quit," briefly surfaced in conversations within the locker room. It's important to note that Clark did not immediately leave the team. She returned to practice the next morning and participated in scheduled activities. However, several observers noticed a change in her demeanor. She appeared quieter than usual, less animated during drills, and more reserved during team discussions. Those subtle shifts in body language were enough to spark speculation among those present at the facility. As the training sessions continued, discussions reportedly moved behind closed doors. Officials from USA Basketball became involved, along with members of the coaching staff, including Stephanie White. No official statement was released to the public, and no press conference addressed the rumors directly. In an era where information spreads instantly across social media, that silence became a powerful force of its own. Videos and photos from the training camp began appearing online, short clips showing Clark standing apart from teammates during breaks or walking alone toward the locker room after practice. Individually, those images seemed ordinary. Athletes often take moments to themselves during intense training camps. But when viewers interpreted them through the lens of the rumored disagreement, each clip suddenly carried a different meaning. The online reaction was immediate and explosive. Fans began connecting the dots between the roster announcement, the coaching structure, and the rumored training camp exchange. For many observers, the situation represented more than a single disagreement. It symbolized a larger question about how institutions manage rising superstars. When a generational talent enters a system built around established hierarchies and traditions, conflict can emerge between innovation and continuity. That tension is not unique to women's basketball. It appears in nearly every major sport whenever a transformative player changes the landscape.
And it's not about your competition, who you're playing. It's about being confident in who you are.
The stakes surrounding this particular moment are especially high because the tournament scheduled in San Juan, Puerto Rico in March 2025 represents more than a single competition. It serves as an early step in the selection process for the FIBA Women's Basketball World Cup and eventually the 2028 Summer Olympics. Performances during these qualifying events often shape how coaches evaluate players for future international rosters. Athletes who receive significant playing time and demonstrate strong chemistry within the system typically gain an advantage when the next roster decisions are made. Conversely, players who struggle to find their role or who receive limited opportunities may face an uphill battle to secure their place in future tournaments. Within the guard rotation of the current roster, competition is intense. Veterans like Chelsea Gray and Kelsey Plum bring extensive international experience and championship credentials. Both players were key contributors during the 2024 Summer Olympics, and both have long-standing relationships with the USA basketball program. Those relationships often matter in international team selection because familiarity and trust can be critical during short tournaments where teams have limited time to build chemistry. Yet Clark's recent performance level introduces a new dimension to that equation. Her rookie statistics would place her among the top guards in almost any WNBA season, not just among first-year players. This contrast highlights a fundamental difference between two philosophies that sometimes guide roster decisions. One philosophy emphasizes longevity and established relationships within the program. Players who have participated in previous tournaments and built trust with coaches receive the first opportunity to maintain their roles. The other philosophy prioritizes current performance and momentum, rewarding players who are demonstrating exceptional form regardless of their tenure within the system. When those philosophies collide, difficult decisions inevitably follow. For fans watching the situation unfold, the concern isn't necessarily about any individual player or coach. Instead, it revolves around whether the system allows the most exciting talents in the sport to showcase their abilities fully. When a player with Clark's influence and skill must navigate multiple layers of hierarchy simply to secure a fair opportunity, supporters begin questioning whether the structure itself needs adjustment. Despite the intense speculation, one fact remains clear. Clark has not officially withdrawn from Team USA. She has not released a public statement announcing her departure from the program. The tension reported within the training camp environment may represent nothing more than the natural friction that occurs when passionate competitors debate strategy and roles. Such conversations happen frequently in professional sports, even if they rarely become public. What makes this moment unique is the extraordinary spotlight surrounding Clark and the enormous expectations placed on every step of her career. As preparations for international competition continue, the basketball world is watching closely to see how this situation evolves. Will the coaching staff adjust the offensive structure to maximize Clark's strengths? Will Clark find a rhythm within the system that allows her creativity to flourish? Or will this moment become a turning point in the relationship between one of the sport's biggest stars and the national program she represents? For now, the answers remain uncertain. What is certain, however, is that the discussion sparked by these events has already reshaped the conversation about leadership, player freedom, and the future direction of women's basketball at the international level.
Great job reading the defense. Her hands were...
As the situation surrounding Caitlin Clark and the national team continues to unfold, one thing has become very clear to everyone watching from the outside. The conversations happening behind closed doors are not rumors or exaggerations. They are real discussions taking place among players, coaches, and officials. The tension that has reportedly developed during the early stages of training camp is real as well. And perhaps most importantly, the frustration that Clark is carrying into this tournament is also very real. In professional sports, especially at the international level, chemistry and trust are not optional ingredients for success. They are the foundation that every championship team is built upon. You can assemble the most talented roster in the world, but if the players do not believe in the system, or if the system does not allow those players to operate at their best, even the strongest lineup can struggle. That is why the current situation matters so much. When the most influential player on the roster begins questioning whether the structure around her is actually designed to help her succeed, it creates a ripple effect that touches every corner of the team environment. For a program like USA Basketball, those concerns carry enormous weight because the upcoming competition is not just another international appearance, it is a global showcase that will be watched by millions. The tournament taking place in San Juan, Puerto Rico, beginning March 11th, is technically a qualifying event for the FIBA Women's Basketball World Cup. However, the importance of the event goes far beyond simple qualification. It is the first opportunity for this new generation of American players to perform together on a global stage before the massive spotlight of the 2028 Summer Olympics. Media organizations across the country are preparing extensive coverage of the Games. Sports networks will be analyzing every possession, streaming platforms will broadcast highlights within minutes, and social media will amplify every moment of brilliance or controversy. The world will be watching not only to see whether the team wins, but to observe how this extraordinary collection of players performs together. The roster itself represents one of the deepest pools of talent ever assembled for an American women's national team outside of an Olympic year. The group includes stars such as Caitlin Clark, Paige Buchers, Angel Reese, Aaliyah Boston, Chelsea Gray, Kelsey Plum, Kalia Copper, Dewana Bonner, Ryan Howard, Kiki Iriafin, Jackie Young, and Sonia Citron. When analysts look at that lineup collectively, many believe it could represent the most dynamic and versatile national team roster assembled between Olympic cycles in women's basketball history.
We're 10 points off of 6 fever turnovers, so that's really...
If these players find rhythm together, if the coaching staff successfully blends their talents into a fluid system, the tournament could easily become one of the most watched women's basketball events in American history. The sport has been experiencing an unprecedented surge in popularity over the last few years. Television ratings have climbed dramatically, arenas are selling out, and merchandise sales continue breaking records. Much of that growth can be traced to the emergence of a new generation of stars, players whose charisma, competitiveness, and style of play have attracted audiences far beyond traditional basketball fans. But the momentum of a growing sport depends heavily on delivering exciting performances when the spotlight is brightest. If this roster thrives together, it will strengthen the momentum of women's basketball for years to come. On the other hand, if the system fails to maximize the potential of these players, if rotations feel confusing, if certain stars are used in roles that limit their impact, or if the offense becomes stagnant, then the tournament could quickly transform from a celebration of talent into a missed opportunity. Much of that responsibility rests with the coaching staff, led by Carol Lawson. Lawson's experience at the collegiate level, particularly with Duke University, demonstrates her ability to build disciplined teams with strong defensive identities. However, the structure that works effectively in college basketball does not always translate directly to a roster filled with professional stars who have spent years refining their own styles of play. At the international level, flexibility often becomes the most valuable coaching skill. Instead of forcing players into a rigid system, successful coaches typically design strategies that highlight the unique strengths of their roster. With a lineup containing elite scorers, creative playmakers, and versatile defenders, the opportunity exists to build an offense that moves quickly, spreads the floor, and allows players to make instinctive decisions. If Lawson can adapt her approach to match the dynamic talent on this roster, the results could be spectacular. Another key figure in this situation is assistant coach Stephanie White, who has worked closely with Clark during her time with the Indiana Fever. White's presence on the national team staff is widely viewed as a logical decision given her success as a coach and her experience developing competitive teams in the WNBA. Yet her existing relationship with Clark adds an additional layer of complexity. When a player spends months under one coaching philosophy and then enters an international program where the same voice is still guiding strategy, it can blur the lines between two separate basketball environments. For Clark to perform at her best, she may need to feel that the national team is evaluating her abilities with completely fresh eyes rather than continuing patterns established during the WNBA season. That does not mean White's involvement is problematic. It simply means awareness of that dynamic becomes important. By creating space for Clark to rediscover her rhythm and confidence within a slightly different framework, the coaching staff could help transform potential tension into productive collaboration. Of course, the responsibility does not rest entirely with the coaches. Clark herself faces an important decision about how to approach the challenges of this tournament. Throughout her career, she has demonstrated remarkable resilience and determination. She has already rewritten record books, transformed fan engagement around women's basketball, and elevated the visibility of the sport to levels that few could have imagined just a few years ago. Yet the international stage introduces a new dimension of pressure. Representing one's country involves expectations that extend far beyond individual performance. Every action on the court becomes part of a larger narrative about teamwork, leadership, and national pride. For Clark, maintaining focus on the long-term goals may prove essential. The upcoming tournaments are not isolated events. They represent stepping stones toward the World Cup and eventually the Olympic Games scheduled for Los Angeles.
Clark launches, nails it.
The 2028 Summer Olympics carry special significance for American athletes because they will take place on home soil. The city of Los Angeles is renowned for its vibrant culture, global influence, and deep connection to sports and entertainment. Hosting the Olympic Games there for the third time creates an opportunity for athletes to compete in front of passionate domestic crowds while showcasing their talents to an international audience. For Clark and many of her peers, the journey toward that moment has already begun. Every qualifying tournament, every training camp, and every international appearance contributes to building the roster that will eventually represent the United States on that stage. Walking away from the process, even for understandable reasons, could complicate that path. At the same time, the broader conversation sparked by this situation extends beyond any single player. The rise of this generation of athletes has fundamentally changed the landscape of women's basketball. Stars like Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, and Paige Buchers have introduced millions of new viewers to the sport. Many of those fans had never previously watched a WNBA game or followed international women's basketball competitions. Their interest was sparked by thrilling performances, intense rivalries, and personalities that resonated far beyond traditional sports audiences. Television ratings surged as a result. Arena attendance increased dramatically. Jerseys and other merchandise sold out within days of release. The sport experienced a cultural moment that expanded its reach across media platforms and demographics. However, attracting new audiences is only the first step. Retaining that attention requires delivering compelling basketball on the court. Fans who discovered the sport because of exciting players want to continue seeing those players operate in ways that highlight their unique talents. If systems or strategies appear to suppress creativity or limit star players unnecessarily, viewers may become frustrated. This does not mean that team structures should disappear. Successful teams always require discipline and coordination. But it does mean that balancing structure with freedom becomes crucial when dealing with athletes whose skill sets thrive on innovation. From the perspective of many supporters, the current debate represents a pivotal moment for the leadership of USA Basketball. The organization must demonstrate that it understands how dramatically the sport has evolved. The new wave of fans did not arrive because they were fascinated by tactical systems or coaching diagrams. They arrived because they were captivated by extraordinary players performing at extraordinary levels. Those players are the engine driving the sport's popularity. Ensuring that they have the opportunity to showcase their abilities within the national team environment is therefore not just a strategic choice. It is essential for maintaining the momentum that women's basketball has worked so hard to build. Right now, as training continues in Puerto Rico, Clark reportedly finds herself reflecting on whether the environment around her truly supports that vision. This does not mean she lacks confidence or resilience. On the contrary, her career has repeatedly demonstrated mental toughness and a relentless competitive spirit. The question she appears to be asking is one that many elite athletes eventually confront: whether the system they are operating within is designed to elevate their strengths or simply manage their presence within a predetermined structure. It is a fair question, and the answer will likely emerge through the decisions made during the tournament itself. Decisions about rotations, playing time, offensive schemes, and public messaging. As the opening game approaches, anticipation continues to build. When the tournament begins on March 11th in San Juan, the performances on the court will reveal far more than any rumor or speculation. They will show how the coaching staff chooses to deploy its talent. They will demonstrate how the players respond to pressure and expectations. And they will provide a glimpse into whether this extraordinary roster can transform potential tension into championship chemistry. Regardless of the outcome, one truth has already become impossible to ignore. Women's basketball has entered a new era of visibility and influence. The attention surrounding these events proves that the sport can no longer be overlooked. Whether Clark ultimately stays, adapts, and leads the team through this challenge, or whether the debate continues to intensify, the impact of this moment will linger. The era when women's basketball struggled for recognition has passed. A new generation of athletes has captured the imagination of fans around the world, and the institutions guiding the sport must now decide how to support that momentum. The coming days will reveal whether those leaders are ready to embrace the moment or risk falling behind it. Now we want to hear from you. What do you think should happen next? Should Clark push through the tension and prove herself on the international stage, or would stepping away send a stronger message about the need for change? Share your honest thoughts in the comments, because the conversation around the story is only just beginning, and as always, we'll be here covering every update as it happens.